Okay, good morning, folks at home. Here are the people you've been missing so dearly. We'll start with that one, and the other ones, and the not so pleasant ones, and then the one no one misses. Just kidding. Where am I? Sorry, I usually pick on Carol. I should have gone this way. All right, Mr. V here. We're going to do a quick mini lesson over the Electoral College, thanks to a question from the other section about elections and how they work. So to start things off today, when you register to vote, who do you register with? The state. Are you sure? The county. Are you sure?
No.
No, don't even bother, right? When you register to vote, who do you vote? Who do you register with? One of those was right, by the way. You were actually correct. It's the state of Ohio. Okay. Now you register with the state. Now this is where it gets confusing. The county is the one that runs the actual board of elections for your local precincts. Okay, and counts them up. You do register through the state, though. Okay? It is a state-run election. There is no such thing as a national election, all right? The whole idea is that you vote within your state along the parameters that your state sets forth, and I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a lot of things in the news about voting, how people are voting, whether absentee ballots will be allowed, and if so, how and in what capacity because of COVID. And of course, you've heard a lot about election rigging, okay? You've heard people say things like, well, I think it's rigged, or I think the Postal Service isn't going to deliver the ballots on time, or whatever the case may be. There's a reason that that's such a big deal, okay? Aside from your given right to vote, aside from that's provided to you, it's really the method that is under scrutiny right now, how you vote, okay? Now, just a quick question, is Ohio a state that allows you to do an absentee ballot? Yes, we are. We allow you to do an absentee ballot. You are allowed to apply for it, okay? And Ohio, very controversially, from the Secretary of State's office, sent out absentee ballot forms. They sent out, and they're request forms. They're not actual ballots. But they did send them out, trying to advertise the fact that you can fill out the form, send it in, and they will send you an absentee ballot, okay? Full disclosure, I always do that. I have been absentee ballot voting for quite some time. It's my own personal choice. The reason? I don't like standing in lines, okay? And where I live out in Butler County, there's always a line at 6:30 in the morning, okay? And it kills me because there's always retirees that literally have nothing else to do all day, but they show up early. And I'm always behind them in line. And it drives me up the wall. So I don't get aggravated about voting. I just do it absentee. Or we do in Ohio early voting. Early voting you can do at the Board of Election. You can show up during their times. And usually it's a couple weekends in October, sometimes during the week as well. Your local county board of elections will publicize that. They put it out there that these are the hours they'll be open, and you show up and vote just like you would on election day. You're just doing it weeks beforehand. Okay, I've done that before. And of course, the other route is by actually showing up to your precinct, whether it be your local school, your local VFW, your local church, whatever venue your precinct is housed in. You show up. You provide your name, your address, you sign in, and you go in and vote, okay? And of course, every state has their own rules about that, okay? Because again, states run their own elections. They make the choices. Now, some states have chosen not to do absentee. Very controversially, Wisconsin, during the primary, was forced to go to the polls. If you wanted to vote in Wisconsin, you had to go to the polls. That was a very controversial thing. It was basically something where the governor said, hey, we're going to shut down the election, we're going to move it because of COVID. and a judge overruled them and said, no, we're moving forward. Okay, so again, it can be very controversial, but again, it's state by state. Now that is important to understand when you look at the presidential election, which is what the question was that kind of germinated this whole thing. The question from the students in the other section was, on the presidential election, when it comes to this, what's the importance of the Electoral College? You know, they were really trying to understand why the Electoral College matters so much. And most Americans really should ask the question and should try and understand what the Electoral College is. Otherwise, you're not going to understand how the presidential election actually takes place, okay? If you've ever watched an election night coverage, you will notice that every network, whether it be Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, whoever that you're watching, when you tune in, they've got a map of the United States behind them. And it's blank at the beginning of the evening. As states close their polling, as they shut down their polling stations, the results start coming in, and these states start turning the colors that you see up here, okay? Now, this is an excellent resource if you ever want to understand presidential or even congressional politics. 270towin.com takes a bunch of different polling data and synthesizes it into an electoral college map model. They do this for the congressional districts. They do this for the Senate seats. They even do it for the gubernatorial elections as well for the states. But today we're going to primarily focus on the presidential election. Now, the reason they call it 270 to win is in the Electoral College you need 270 votes to win. First person to 270 wins the election, okay? Now, where do they get that? The Electoral College is made up of electors, okay? Hence the term Electoral College, okay? These electors are voted on by the states, okay? So when you go to vote for the presidency, if let's say you were a voter this year, when you walk in and you got to make a choice between Trump, Biden, or you're going to take one of the third-party candidates, you are not voting directly for them, okay? That vote is not going directly to Trump, directly to Biden, Jorgensen, whoever, okay? That vote is not registered for them. They're registered for a slate of electors within your state. It is based around the mathematical principles of how many senators and how many representatives in the House you have in your state, okay? That's how they get the mathematical formula. Now, overall, how many senators are there in the United States? How many senators are there in the Senate? All right, how many states do we have? Let's start there. 50. How many senators do you have per state? 2. So if there's 50 states, and each, oh good, all right, we're skipping ahead, good. 100 senators, okay? 2 per state. Who are your senators, by the way, for the state of Ohio? DeWine is your governor. He was a senator, though. He was.
I don't know what a senator is.
Okay.
So
Anybody know who your senators are?
No. Hang on, what just said?
You're one of the rare states that has a Democrat and a Republican.
Really?
Most states, they go one way or the other. You guys are a weird state.
So what do we have a toss?
Because you overwhelmingly voted for Sherrod Brown, who is the Democrat, and you overwhelmingly voted for Rob Portman, who's the Republican. Okay? So Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown are your 2 senators, and again, one's a Democrat, one's a Republican. All right? So Ohio is one of those weird states. We'll get to what those weird states are called here in a second. Okay? You have 100 senators total in the Senate. Anybody know how many representatives we have in the House total? This one's harder.
400.
You're not far off.
270.
Okay? She said 400. Now, folks, if you're really enterprising, you would have already been kind of doing the math to know that if I've got to get to 270 to win, it's probably half of whatever this addition is. Okay? Now, if you were to do that algebraic equation, you would come up with the fact that this number is a little off. 435, it's a little off because if you add these together, 435 representatives and 100 senators, you get 535. Well, half of 535 is not 270. Okay? 270 times 2 is what? Holy cow. 540, okay. We actually have a grand total of 538 in the Electoral College. The reason they say that you have to get to 270 to win is because this number divided by 2 is 269. Okay? That's half, plus 1 is 270. All right? So half plus 1 and you win the presidency. Now the question is, where do they get these 3 votes from? Okay? It would take a lot of very critical, a critical eye, basically, to figure out over this where we get the extra 3. Anybody see up there anything that doesn't quite belong? Alaska's a state. All 50 states are up there, but there's one area that is not a state but still gets votes. Washington, D.C. Okay? Okay, Washington, D.C. is between Virginia and Maryland right here. It is its own, right here, it's where it's counted anyway. It is its own, it's called a district. So therefore it's a territory of the United States government. It's not part of Virginia, it's not part of Maryland, all right? So that's where Washington, D.C. is. Every year I have a student that's like, where? Is it out here? No, here. Washington's District of Columbia. It's actually from Washington's estate. He donated the land. The land had a bunch of mosquitoes on it. It was swampland. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. over the summer, you know how miserable it is. Okay? If you've ever taken a family vacation in July or August, it is sweltering, it's humid, it's, you know, towards the evening, you're just swatting mosquitoes left and right. Washington never actually lived there. The first president to ever live in the White House was John Adams, and he hated every minute of it. Even his wife hated it even more. If you ever read Abigail Adams' writings, she couldn't stand that place. Okay, Washington, D.C. was a place that even Congress and the president for years in the early 1800s, they would just go home over the summer. They just leave, okay, because it was just that miserable. It's not much better today, okay, but needless to say, that area, they were given 3 electoral college votes because they are a district. And for years, they were voting in presidential elections, and it wasn't counting for anything, all right? So they were going and voting, and it wasn't counting. Now, we still have areas where that's true. Anybody know an area that does vote, but their votes don't count for the president? Even though they're voting, they don't count for anything. All 50 states in the District of Columbia, they count. U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, any territory of the United States, Guam, they vote, okay, but they don't count for anything. They're counted in the popular total, but the Electoral College was the constitutional compromise, if you will, on the presidential election. What they were trying to do with the Electoral College system is make it to where smaller states still had a say. They were worried at the time, and remember at the time, this was the United States over here. This was it. The rest of this was all unsettled territory and native land, okay? This area right here is the United States back in the late 1700s, in 1787. When they sat down in Philadelphia to come up with a plan of how to elect the chief executive under the Constitution, they were worried that the 2 most populous states were going to rule everything. They were worried Virginia and Massachusetts were going to just dominate the White House. Because if you just go strict popular vote, the 2 most populous states would probably put forth their candidates, vote overwhelmingly for them, and put them in the White House. Now the irony is that since the 2 most populous states were Massachusetts and Virginia, the first 6 presidents of the United States, even though they adopted the Electoral College system, came from Massachusetts and Virginia anyway. Okay, Washington, Virginia. Adams, Massachusetts, then it was Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, they were all from Virginia, and then John Quincy Adams, completing the first family, if you will, to serve as a father and a son, Massachusetts as well. It wasn't until we got to the 7th president, which was Andrew Jackson. Jackson was originally from South Carolina and was living in Tennessee at the time. It's the first time we had somebody that was not, and by the way, when we get to him in the AP US history curriculum, you're going to find out just how odd Andrew Jackson was comparative to the first 6. He is nothing like the first 6, okay? So, needless to say, the Electoral College system takes 7 presidents to actually be effective at achieving the compromise that they came up with. But we've been using this compromise ever since. Now, this is very controversial because this compromise has come up as being somewhat unfair if you're a Democrat and fantastic if you're a Republican, okay? It would be just as controversial if it was the other way around too, okay? So that right now, if you're a Democrat, you probably want to get rid of this system. If you're a Republican, you want to hold on to it. And the reason is, if you remember in 2016, Donald Trump did not win the popular vote, okay? He lost by about 3 million votes. Now, some people would say and argue some of those votes came from territories, okay? And they're not wrong, okay? The popular vote is just a pool of votes. Some of those votes came from states like California, which are unbelievably populous and overwhelmingly Democrat. You can see on this map how dark blue it is because it's solidly in the Democratic favor. And there are far more people in this state than there are in most of these states combined, okay? So even though you have these massive states like Wyoming, Montana, I mean, Montana's big sky country, but hardly anybody lives there, okay? So you have all this territory, not many people, and you can see the Electoral College votes are rewarded based upon your representation in Congress and the fact that every state has 2 senators. So the lowest point value you can get in the Electoral College is 3, okay? That's the lowest you can go. That is why D.C., under the 24th Amendment, when they were awarded Electoral College votes, they were awarded the lowest point value. So whatever the lowest point value is, they get it, it's 3. Okay, so they count for 3 votes, yes.
Is that what the numbers underneath, like the abbreviations are?
Each one of these states, this is their Electoral College value right now.
Oh,
Okay? So Ohio currently has 18. This will be the last presidential election where we have 18. It will go down because Ohio is shrinking in population comparative to the rest of the United States. All right? That is for a multitude of factors. Number one, for the longest time we have been part of what is considered the Rust Belt. I don't know if you've ever heard that terminology before, but states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, we were the producers. We were factory jobs. We were, automobile plants and steel and things like that. During the late 1800s, early 1900s, we were the manufacturers. Well, those plants have been slowly shutting down and moving to other locations. Because of that, these states' populations have been slowly shrinking. And it's not that we're not reproducing. It's not that we don't have younger generations being born. It's not that we don't have people coming in. We're just not growing as fast as other states. The states that are currently growing in population are what is known as the Sun Belt. This area through here, okay? The Sun Belt is growing because for the longest time, people were like, I'm not moving to Arizona or Texas, it's too dang hot. Well, what invention made it possible for them to go and live there comfortably? Air conditioning. Late 20th century, when air conditioning was invented and became affordable for in-home use, people started, let's be honest, who was moving to Phoenix back in the early 1900s when it was, 115 degrees? And if you talk to people from Phoenix, I have family that live out there, they always say, oh, it's a dry heat. Like, it's still 115 degrees. If I can walk out and fry an egg on the sidewalk, I'm not moving there, okay? But they swear by it, they love it down there, and it's because they have AC, all right? They can now survive there and live somewhat comfortably. And this is kind of a place where, you notice, where are people retiring to? They're retiring to Scottsdale, Arizona. They're retiring down to Florida. And where are those retirees coming from? They're coming from places like Ohio. Like my aunt and uncle who moved to Arizona. They were in the middle of shoveling snow one winter and said, what are we still doing here? And moved to Arizona that spring. Okay? That's just how it kind of generally has moved. Okay? So these states down here are growing at least quicker than the ones up here. Now, the reason I say it will be the last one is every 10 years, according to the Constitution, it is mandated that we count the population. What do we call that? It's the census, okay? And you guys have heard about the 2020 census. Your parents may have logged on and actually done that. You might have done it for them, okay? Because, of course, they were doing a lot of that during the quarantine last school year, okay? And of course, they were doing it all throughout the summer too. You may have had a visit, you may have had a phone call, you may have had a lot of things from the Census Bureau, reminding you to do that. And just the other day, Ohio was ranked as one of the better states at returning Census Bureau information, which is good because it's the official count of the population. And if we do it correctly, we get our governmental services are provided more correctly than others, okay? Meaning we get a bigger slice of the pie, if you will, and it helps us when it comes to divvying up the Electoral College. We are still going to be smaller, though, than we were 10 years ago. No matter what we do under the count, we're still going to be smaller, so that because of that, we're probably looking at being maybe 16 or 17, okay, in the Electoral College out of votes. Why? We're going to lose a couple of House seats. Nobody's going to lose senators, okay? Everybody has 2 senators, but we will probably lose a House seat, maybe 2, okay? For a while there, it was looking like we were going to lose 3. So, fingers crossed, here's hoping Ohio stays relevant, okay? You may not want to stay relevant, I'll explain that here in a second, but Ohio right now is sitting at 18, which means it's not a huge state, but it's still a very valuable state. Because again, what are these folks trying to do? They are trying to make sure that they get a certain amount of the Electoral College in order to win. Just 270 to win. Now, if you come to this site, you notice that they have a bunch of different options. I'm going to start off with a blank map here because it helps to illustrate exactly how this works. Okay? Now, you notice Ohio has 18 Electoral College votes. In the Electoral College, the way it works is it is for 48 of the 50 states, and I'll get to the 2 that don't do this, but for 48 of the 50 states, it's a winner-take-all system. What that means, November 3rd, your parents go to vote. They go in, they select Trump, they select Biden, whoever it is. The state counts it up. The state then says, in the state of Ohio, Donald Trump got X amount of votes, Joe Biden got X amount of votes, and they compare them. Whoever wins in the state gets all 18 Electoral College votes. It doesn't matter if they win by 1 vote or 1,000,000, they get all 18. Okay? This is why in the year 2000, when George W. Bush won Florida by roughly 300 votes, it was very controversial. Because when he won Florida, he won all the Electoral College votes regardless of how close it was. Okay? That's why Hillary Clinton in 2016, she won California by millions of votes. So it wasn't a surprise when she won the popular vote, because California voted overwhelmingly for her, whereas in other states it was a little closer, even when Donald Trump won, it was close, So it didn't kind of shall we say, cancel out, if you will, the effect of the popular vote. So in 2016, when Donald Trump won the Electoral College, but failed to win the popular vote, a lot of Democrats cried foul because the same thing happened back in 2000 between Al Gore and George W. Bush, all right? And that's kind of spawned the idea that the last 2 times a Republican has won the first term of a presidency, they have not won the majority of the American vote, okay? Now, before you get all bent out of shape about that, if you're a Democrat, you need to go back to 1992 and realize there was a 3-way race for the presidency, because they had a guy named Ross Perot who just recently passed away. He ran against the sitting president, who also just passed away, George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, Bush 41, and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton only got 43% of the vote that year, so he did not receive 50% plus of the popular vote. Okay? So the vast majority of the Americans voted against Bill Clinton, so to speak. Okay? They voted for 2 candidates, and that split it. And it's not the only time that's happened in American history. We're going to certainly get plenty of opportunities to kind of point to that as we go through American politics. But the argument over the popular vote gets a little dicey when you start adding in the fact that there are third-party candidates. Okay? So the Electoral College system, sometimes it doesn't work exactly the way it maybe should, or maybe it does. It depends on your political leanings. Now, why do I bring all that up? You have to understand how this works. 48 of the 50 are winner take all. Now there are some states, too, that divide them. Maine and Nebraska. Maine and Nebraska split them. according to their state constitutions, the way they run their state elections. The way they do it is if you win the overall state, okay, you get the basically Senate votes. Okay, you get the 2 votes from the Senate. If you win congressional districts, you get their votes too. But that allows for somebody to win the entire state overall, one of the congressional districts, but lose the other one. Okay? It allows for congressional districts to be a little bit more in play, if you will. Now, most of the time, they are not in play. Most of the time, it's pretty much, you know, the state is going one way or the other. But every once in a while, you will see Maine or Nebraska striked, meaning that somebody won the state. You know, let's say Trump wins Nebraska, but he loses one of the congressional districts. It'll be a stripe on that. You know, there'll be a striped pattern, if you will, to the state. But overall, on election night, on November 3rd, you're going to tune in, and they're going to basically be saying, all right, this person has won this state. We can project this person, and it turns red or blue. Now, if it's red, it's Republican. If it's blue, it's Democrat. So what this allows you to do is to kind of go through and see what happens on election night. So let's say on November 3rd, and I'm going to do kind of a basic rundown of how this works. They're going to say, all right, the polls have closed, and New York normally votes fairly Democratic. So of course, let's say they say, all right, we can project that New York goes for Biden. He gets 29 in the Electoral College vote. Let's say that, and New Jersey normally votes very Democratic typically. So does Connecticut, so does Massachusetts, so does Rhode Island. Don't forget Rhode Island. So right off the bat, if he just wins kind of that region, and this is usually why on election night the Democrats usually are cheering very early because, hey, we're off to the races, but they're still 200 plus votes shy. Now, of course, why does that matter? Sometimes Pennsylvania doesn't quite know yet what's going on. Delaware normally votes fairly Democratic, and that's where Joe Biden's from, so most likely it'll vote for him. And let's say Maryland too. And right away, Democrats are feeling good. But then they go into, all right, West Virginia typically votes Republican. Let's say North Carolina comes back Republican, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Now, we are going to learn that this is called the Solid South strategy. Democrats used to win the South post-Civil War. The Republicans have taken over that region for a multitude of different reasons. The simple answer is because of civil rights legislation. It's way more complex than that. And then when we hit Nixon, somewhere around April, we'll kind of discuss how that strategy changed, okay? Kentucky typically votes Republican, and just out of those, now we've got a neck-and-neck race, roughly 70 some odd votes. Now I've left Virginia, Florida, and Pennsylvania out, okay? And let's say Indiana comes back and says, hey, we're voting Republican. Let's say Vermont says Democrat. Let's say New Hampshire. And let's say Maine, but splits, just for fun. Okay? So here we are. It doesn't matter about actual territory. Okay? It matters about population centers, and some of these states have bigger populations than others, obviously, based around the numbers. But you can see early, it's usually kind of neck and neck, all right? Then, of course, we hit what is known as the Bible Belt, which tends to be very conservative. And let's say they live up to their name and decide to be pretty much what they've consistently been for a while now. And right now, with all these red territories, you would start to say to yourself, man, Trump should be winning overwhelmingly. But again, it's a lot of territory, not many people, okay? So yes, there's a lot of red on here, but that's because it's not, I mean, Wyoming, as I've said before, 15 people and a goat. It's not, you know, a huge metropolitan area. After all these, and let's say there's even, let's say, you know, New Mexico goes for him and Arizona goes for him. Okay, right away it looks like it would be commanding. Well, then what happens? California's polls close. And right back, Biden is right there neck and neck. All it takes is one state. Now, Oregon tends to be fairly Democratic. Usually Washington tends to be very Democratic. And just like that, Here we are, 162 to 161. Now, no one is close to 270 electoral college votes at this point. Anybody know why I've left some of these states blank? And of course, I've forgotten DC here, which usually votes somewhat Democratic. Okay? Why have I left some of these states? I'm sorry? They're swing states. Very good. That's the term. Swing states. Now, the reason I leave Texas out is they're even discussing this time around how Texas might actually be in play this time around. Texas normally is very conservative, but they've had a very large population swing in the favor of the Democrats thanks to a large portion of Latino votes, who many of the Latinos were voting conservative for a while because Latinos tend to be conservative due to religion. Okay? And many Latinos tend to be Catholic, and they tend to be on the side of the Republicans when it comes to things like abortion and other things like that. They have swung because Donald Trump has turned them off with his push for the border wall. Okay? So, I don't know if you paid attention a few years back, but there was a Senate election there where a guy named Ted Cruz was running for re-election, and he almost lost to a very young congressman by the name of Beto O'Rourke, who raised a ton of money and proved that you could almost do it. And they have not had a Democratic senator in quite some time. Okay, the last major one from Texas that was a Democrat was a guy named Lyndon Baines Johnson. Okay, so it's been a while since Texas was really ever considered Democratic. Okay, so they are talking about it being a swing state. Now let's say it doesn't. Let's say Trump wins that. All right, now Trump's edging even closer. Okay, Iowa. Let's say Iowa, which has been hit a little hard with farm issues under Trump's presidency. Let's say they decide they want to change. They go with Biden. Let's say Missouri, because of protests and other things in places like St. Louis, decides they want law and order. They go with Donald Trump. Illinois, typically somewhat Democratic. They go with Biden. Now we're starting to get closer and closer to, the nitty-gritty, if you will. Ohio tends to be leaning conservative, so let's say Trump wins. And by the way, historically, no president has ever won the White House during the Republican era without carrying Ohio. No Republican has ever won. Okay, Democrats have, Republicans have not. So Ohio is considered to be key to a Republican victory. Let's say Virginia decides to go Democrat. Pennsylvania, let's say it sticks with Trump because they voted with it, and it was Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania the last time that swung it. Let's say Michigan goes with Trump. He's now at 263. Let's say Wisconsin goes Democrat, Minnesota goes Democrat, Colorado goes Democrat, and Nevada goes Democrat. Who's won? And oh man, I forgot Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska typically goes Republican, Hawaii typically goes Democrat. All right, who's won? You're saying it could all come down to Florida again? I'm sorry?
Doesn't Florida usually vote Republican?
It depends. It's another swing state. It has recently. Okay, it certainly did back in 2016. But this is where the Electoral College matters. It could all come down to one state again. Okay? Now, here's where it gets even more ridiculous. I had New Hampshire down here as being Democrat, but let's say it isn't, okay? And let's say Pennsylvania decides to go Democrat, and just for fun, let's say New Mexico goes Democrat, okay? And that Trump loses Maine. Who won?
Nobody.
Because nobody hit that magic 270, right? So we could literally on election night be waiting for New Hampshire to count their ballots. Now, would it matter if Joe Biden had 10 million more votes across the United States? No. Would not matter. It only matters in that one state in this instance, if this were the way it came down. So we literally could be looking at one state, and you guys, it's before you were born, in 2000, we were literally looking at Florida waiting for them to count, and then recount, and then recount. And there were people protesting, and screaming and yelling, and filing court documents, and taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. And that, yes, there is a Supreme Court case called Bush v. Gore. okay? And they finally said, the Supreme Court finally said, we're done with recounts, declare your winner. Florida declared Bush the winner, and Bush became the 43rd president of the United States.
Does the popular vote like do anything, or is it just there?
It's just there.
Okay.
And this is what people need to realize about this system. This is all that matters when it comes to presidential politics. Now, can we use this? Yes, and it's not as simple as when you say it doesn't count for anything. It doesn't count for anything, and I say no. That's not quite accurate, because Donald Trump, for the first year of his presidency, every time he would hold a rally or he would talk to supporters, he would talk about this beautiful map. Okay, and they even have his Electoral College map victory. 2016 actual. He would project this, and he would say, look at this beautiful map. Because every time he would say he was president, there would be Democrats that would say, well, not really. They would always kind of throw that out there, that, well, not really. And if you tuned into somebody like Sean Hannity on Fox News, Sean Hannity would always say he was duly elected. There was an argument about whether or not Donald Trump was really their president, because there were people out there saying, not my president. And it's a ridiculous argument, because yes, he is the president. According to the Constitution, he is the president. He won the Electoral College. This is the system we run under, okay? You can hate it all you want, but that's how it operates, okay? Now, the reason the popular vote matters is, where were these people getting this phraseology of not my president? They were getting it from the fact that, hey, there were 3 million more Americans that said they wanted Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. Okay, so how do you just discount that? Well, Donald Trump's going to point to this, and he is legitimate in his argument. 306 to 232, he won the presidency. But his naysayers, the people that don't like him, the Democrats or the whoever's, are going to say, hey, wait a minute, you aren't a popular president, if you will. And the key term to understand with this is mandate, all right? Mandate is the power of a president coming into office, all right? When the most powerful president coming into office, and you can certainly argue this, and this is the beauty of history, I would make the argument one of the most powerful presidents coming into office was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay? When he won the presidency during the Great Depression, and it said he had this plan of action of how to deal with the Great Depression, he was able to push through a tremendous amount of legislation in what is called the 100 days, first 100 days. He did more in the first 100 days than any president had ever done before, because he argued he was dealing with a crisis, and he argued that he had won so many states and so many votes that he was too popular to be denied. Now, it does help he was running against Herbert Hoover, who, if you read up on Herbert Hoover, he was a tremendously nice man, and he was a very, very dedicated public servant. He was a very intelligent man. He just politically struggled, okay? And he struggled during the Great Depression. And some economists have actually said he had the right mentality about the Great Depression, and people just need to be patient. And other economists will say FDR had the right mentality. And yet still other economists will argue whether or not the Great Depression was handled by the New Deal, and others will argue that it wasn't really the New Deal, it was World War II that solved it. The beauty of history is that you can talk about it and discuss it, and nobody's wrong so long as you can support yourself, okay? The whole idea here is, what is a mandate? It's the power coming into office. Now, the reason that Donald Trump is saying, look at this map, is he's saying, I am the legitimate president because I had 306, and he very falsely said it's the largest. It's not. It's not the largest win, okay? The largest wins out there, one of the largest wins in the 20th century was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon in 1972 completely decimated George McGovern, okay? It wasn't even close. Ronald Reagan completely decimated in 1984. I'm blanking. Mondale. How do you forget Mondale, By the way, folks, this is Mr. Ryan. I keep forgetting. He's from Mount St. Joe. He's here observing. He'll be here periodically, and he'll teach a lesson here and there, just to break the monotony, if nothing else, kind of doing this kind of stuff. But anyway, these overwhelming, if you look historically, there have been overwhelming Electoral College victories, okay? For that matter, Barack Obama had a fairly comfortable couple of elections in 2008 and 2012, okay? This was not overwhelming. This was a close election. And if you think about it, how close was it? They did a research study in Michigan. If just 2 people per precinct had voted for Clinton over Trump, Clinton would have won Michigan. It was that close. Okay, Pennsylvania was like if 3 or 4 had voted differently. So she ran a pretty poor campaign when it came to local politics. Because keep in mind, just think of how quickly this shifts. If she had won Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, like she was projected in the polls, she'd be the president right now. It was literally 3 states. Okay? And for that matter, you'll notice Maine is shaded. What happens if she had won the whole thing? Who wins? We didn't mention this earlier. What happens in that situation, by the way?
I don't know, that's actually.
269 to 269.
Do a
Coin flip. Oh boy.
It probably is.
We'll do it right before the Super Bowl, you know? They're about the same time when they do the swearing in. Do realize in this situation, according to the Constitution, it goes to the House of Representatives. Okay? The House of Representatives becomes a committee of the whole to basically decide who the next president is going to be.
Has that ever happened?
It has happened 5 times, I believe.
Oh my gosh, who was the president?
Well, it's been a while. Okay? The last times were in the late 1800s. Okay? The most controversial by far was in 1876 when Rutherford B. Hayes won the presidency, but didn't really. Samuel B. Tilden from New York won the presidency, but he didn't win the Electoral College. Because he didn't get an Electoral College plurality, they went to the House, and the Southerners didn't want Tilden as much as they wanted an end to something known as Reconstruction, which we'll talk about. So they negotiated a deal where they said, Republicans, you can have Hayes, we just want to end Reconstruction. Republicans took the deal, so we got 4 years of Rutherford B. Hayes, and black people got Jim Crow laws. Not a good trade. It didn't work out, okay? So needless to say, that's one of the most famous times. But I mentioned Andrew Jackson earlier. He got, in his mind, hosed back in 1824 by this exact same scenario. That he won the popular vote overwhelmingly, but did not become president in 1824. John Quincy Adams did. And it was mostly because they thought Andrew Jackson was a little off his rocker and they didn't trust him to be president of the United States. They were not necessarily wrong. Andrew Jackson was a hothead, and if you read about Andrew Jackson, he is, you know, anybody that ever says, oh, Donald Trump, he's not fit mentally to be president, go back and read about Andrew Jackson. It might make you feel a little bit better, because he's not Jackson. Jackson killed people in duels, for crying out loud. Yeah, he had famous duels and campaigned on it. He was attacked for being too violent once, and he challenged the person to a duel. I mean, Donald Trump does have his problems with the press, but you've never seen him go, Jim Acosta, 10 paces tomorrow. It's not to say I wouldn't put it past him. There's a possibility. You never know. But, you know, the bottom line is we're not living in that America anymore.
Wasn't that Trump said he would box? Didn't Trump say he would fight like another candidate at one point?
Yeah. Do you know which one?
Was it Sanders or Biden?
It's Biden. Because Biden said, you know, back in school, I would have taken him out back and beat him up, you know, and he was talking about, you know, if you know, that's what we used to do in school to bullies. And Trump said, I'll meet you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but yeah. So the debate should be interesting.
Are they still even having a debate?
Well, yes.
That should be
They're still debating as to how.
They should probably do virtually because it seems that they're gonna.
And by the way, anybody know where the first debate's supposed to be?
Who?
Where the actual first debate's going to be?
Ohio.
Ohio, Cleveland,
Really?
Ohio.
Is it really?
Cleveland, Ohio. It's supposed to be on Cleveland State's campus.
Why?
Moderated by Chris Wallace of Fox News, who Trump doesn't particularly care for because he had a pretty disastrous interview with Chris Wallace about a month and a half ago.
What was it about?
COVID
Did you get a stupid response?
Well, Chris Wallace asked a follow-up question or two, and it didn't work out very well. Okay? No, sometimes he gets softball questions. And look, before you attack him for that, every president does that. Okay? If Barack Obama wanted a easy interview, all he had to do was go on the Daily Show and talk to Jon Stewart. Because Jon Stewart would joke around about him, talk about how great he was, and then they'd ask a couple of questions, they'd laugh, and then move on with life. Okay? Every president has that person they love to go to because they make them look good. Okay? Sometimes they go on, like Bill Clinton loved going on late night talk shows. He loved going, Arsenio Hall had a late night talk show. When he was running for the presidency, he went on Arsenio Hall, and he was apparently a saxophone player. He loved playing the sax, and he loved jazz music and R&B, and he played with the band. And everybody was like, oh, he's a normal, average person. Bill Clinton is not a normal, average person. Okay? None of these people are. You know, Barack Obama's not a normal, average person. These people are very intelligent, they're very political, they're involved, you know, they're not typical humans. Okay? They're not run-of-the-mill type people. Now, some of the people in Congress can be. I was a congressional aide for a little while, and my representative was pretty down to earth. But then again, I'm from northern Ohio, country, you know, rural district where they're not going to elect somebody that's an elitist out there. I mean, Regula was raised on a farm, so he knew what it was like to be a farmer, and he was a lawyer. You know, he was a country lawyer, so he always used to compare himself to Lincoln on the campaign trail, and then laughed that people believed it behind the scenes. Like, I can't tell you how many times we were riding to different campaign events, and he was just laughing. He was like, I can't believe that people actually believe that. You know, somebody compared me to Lincoln. What in the heck are they talking about? No, he was a very kind of down-to-earth person, but there are other people on Capitol Hill who are not down-to-earth. They are living in another stratosphere of existence. Okay? And I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, by the way. Both sides have their crazies. Okay? One of the most colorful people you will ever come across is a guy from Ohio, a guy by the name of Dennis Kucinich. That guy was out there. He's entertaining. He believes in alien abductions. Talked about it openly. At one point, he almost kind of inferred that he himself had experienced one.
Maybe he did.
He's a strange cat. But I'll tell you, and I'm dating myself here, but I was out in D.C. when Strom Thurmond was still alive. You want to talk about a very interesting character. Strom Thurmond, he was 100 years old. He turned 100 when he was in the Senate, and was planning on running for re-election when he was 102. And South Carolina would have sent him back. This man was so old that he ran in 1948 for the presidency as a Dixiecrat. And you'll learn this year, a Dixiecrat is somebody that is a Southern Democrat that wanted to hold on to Jim Crow laws. Okay? He was still in the Senate in the late 1990s. Early 2000s, really. He lived that long. Another senator got in trouble for saying at his birthday party, America would have been a better place had we voted for you in 1948. A very stupid thing to say. Yeah, when he turned 100. He died soon after. The man was famous all the way through his career for being very racist. And then when he died, his daughter came out and said, I'm his daughter. Guess what? She was African American. She was mixed. He had a child with the maid of the family back when he was, I think he was like 21.
That's a scandal.
Yep.
Right there.
According to the daughter, he loved the mother very much. They just couldn't get married because it would ruin his political career.
Who would love him if he was racist?
Apparently he wasn't. He just acted that way.
He had an entanglement.
If you go back and read through the papers of George Wallace, he wasn't really. George Wallace was the governor of Alabama, who, if you ever watch Forrest Gump, he's the guy standing on the front of the schoolhouse door in the University of Alabama, refusing to allow African Americans into the campus. He very famously said, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." He was very adamant about whites over here, blacks over there. But if you look at his private papers from the 1950s, he's very confused as to why Alabama is still holding on to this system And what happened? He lost an election. He lost an election to somebody else that was more racist than he was. And he said publicly, and I will not say it because I will never say the word, nobody will never out-end me again. You know what word I'm referring to when I say yeah, okay? So he all of a sudden realized that he had to play racist. Now, I think he was racist,
Definitely.
okay? And look, you do have to be careful in American history calling somebody racist or whatever else using your current belief structure, okay? Because by our current belief structure, anybody from even 20 years ago is racist, sexist, homophobic. Society changes, the values change, okay? Which is a good thing, but you always have to be careful when somebody goes back. It's what is known as revisionist history. You really can't go back and judge people for the time period they lived in. You can disagree with how they said things, but to go back and just absolutely crucify Thomas Jefferson for some of the racist things he wrote, you have to then realize that he wrote all men are created equal. The things that we put as a bedrock of our republic are his words. So if he's racist, what does that make us? If we're, moving towards this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, of course, you can parse his words, you can question what he meant, and you can question, all manner of things about him, but to hold him up to 2020 standard, that's not fair to anybody. So do realize as we go through, you got to be a little careful about how you treat some of these people, okay, and how you judge some of these people. Now, other people are, you can feel free to go after Strom Thurmond, even though Strom Thurmond's daughter said he wasn't racist, he just played it on TV. Okay. He walked her down the aisle at her wedding. No cameras were allowed.
She's still alive?
She is still alive. She's in her mid-80s right now. So, last time I checked, she was still alive. I don't know if she is or not. Come to think of it, because that was the early 2000s when she came out. But man, you should have seen the press when she came out and was like, "I'm Strom's daughter," and everybody was like, "No," and then she showed pictures, and they're like, "Oh, geez."
What's the name?
Okay. Oh, I can't remember what her name is, but if you look up Strom Thurmond's daughter on Google,
Strom what?
Strom, S-T-R-O-M, last name Thurmond, T-H-U-R-M-O-N-D. All right, so we all kind of understand how this system works now, ish. This is why they fly certain locations. And look, we just said it, Ohio is the first debate. Why? It's a swing state. They want to come here and they want to appeal directly to the voters of Ohio, and quite honestly, this whole region right here, okay? Because those states are in play, and as long as they're in play, and again, you only have to win those states by one vote to get all their electoral college votes. So if you squeak out a victory in Michigan, if you squeak out a victory in Wisconsin, if you're Donald Trump and you squeak those through, you become president, even if you lose by 3, 5, 10 million votes, doesn't matter. Okay? So that being said, buckle up, because for the next month and a half, you're going to see nothing but political ads. That's the glory of being a swing state. You get nothing but ads. Okay? The one nice thing you have, Ohio, is that you don't have a Senate election this year. You just reelected Portman a couple of years ago, and Brown, this is not their cycle. It's every 6 years in the Senate, and this is your non-Senate year, Ohio, so you can skip that one. So a little less advertisements, but you're going to see a lot of Biden and Trump ads. You're going to see a ton of banners and signs, and I know today in Cincinnati they're having one of those Trump rallies where everybody gets their truck and puts the flags on it and drives through. I think it's on the west side. So that'll be going through downtown Cincinnati sometime today. Okay. Hopefully it goes a little bit better than the Trump boat rally down in Texas this weekend. If you missed it, they had the big boat rally on Lake Travis just outside Austin, Texas.
And the boat sank.
5 boats sank.
Oh, God
So-
said not today.
Oh, jeez. What it really was is the bigger boats created too big a wake and the smaller boats went under.
Yay!
We don't want to wish any harm to people, but
Not the people.
there was a lot of irony for some Democrats over the weekend. There was a lot of like, man, that's, if nothing else, dark humor, if nothing else.
Doing God's work.
Jeez.
Doing God's
There are images online of the sunken ships, like with the
Yeah.
flags still kind of floating there. It's really strange. So, anyway. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
Does anybody else, like any other country or whatever, have like a system like this that they use?
Not exactly like this, but I will say this, our system is not as screwy as some of the other countries out there. Like, trying to understand a Swiss election is very difficult. I got lost very quickly when I was over in Switzerland back in, would have been 2008, because I remember distinctly somebody coming up and saying, "You're an American," because we stick out like sore thumbs in Europe, okay? I know I do, because if I'm dressed like this, I'm an American. We're the only people who wear athletic shoes everywhere. Most Europeans don't. They wear loafers or nicer shoes. Okay, like penny loafers, brown shoes,
Like Spears?
like
Yeah.
casual dress.
Like Spears?
Sure. Okay. We're the only ones that fall victim to like, oh, I got to wear Nike, I got to wear Adidas. Like they don't do that. And if they're going to wear that stuff, they're going to go work out. Okay. But and also how we walk. Americans are always in a hurry to get someplace.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would not
When we
know.
travel, we I got to go to the Louvre. Move. Like we're the only ones in Paris that are moving quickly to get someplace.
I even pull up.
Everybody else are they're kind of taking in the ambiance and the city of lights. Oh, well, and we're the only ones that are like, move. I got to go see where Napoleon's buried. It's. But needless to say, when I was over there, some Swiss person, I was out of all things we were in, and I still remember. It's kind of stupid, but my wife was shopping for soap.
Soap?
She and like some. It was kind of like the Swiss Bath and Body Works type deal, So we were in this little shop, and the shop owner looked at me and said, "You're an American?" I went, "Yes." And they're like, "Can you just answer me this? Can George W. Bush be president?" I went, "No, he's term limited." And they went, "Oh, thank God." And they're like, "Is McCain like him?" And I went, "No." "Is Obama like him?" "No." They're like, "Okay, either way, we're fine." It was just that person really didn't like George W. Bush. Okay? And we were talking about it, and I said, I feel real bad because I don't really understand how the Swiss elections work. And he went, "Oh, it's very simple." And he started explaining it, and by step 3, I was gone. And it has something to do with the Swiss cantons, which are like states, districts, regions, territories, whatever you want to call it. And it was literally like, but if this canton votes this way, then that negates the votes of this one. And it was just, I'm out. I have no idea what you're talking about. And he was like, "Well, I think you'd have to actually experience it." I'm like, "I guess."
Okay, so you're saying that.
It's like when you're playing cards, games like euchre, and somebody says, "Well, you got to play it to understand it." I think that's what a Swiss election has to be, because I was lost. The Japanese kind of have some screwy systems of how they get their prime minister. And England's elections aren't exactly the easiest to follow either. So,
Well, I thought England still had the king. Yeah, what did they elect?
King's just a figure.
yeah, the king is just, the king and queens in England are no longer in power. And people at home, I'm sorry, we're going, bye.